Hi, friends. Welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Kristin Carey. I'm hosting alone today, and I'm going to dive into part two of this two-part series, When the Holidays Hurt. If you are in early stages of betrayal recovery, meaning you have had any kind of discovery or disclosure in the last 3 to 6 months, and or you are not totally sure that you have all the truth, if you still feel like an intense sense of lack of safety and stability, then episode one is going to be where you're going to want to start. This episode is geared more at people who are in the phase two part of betrayal recovery, which is known as mourning and remembrance. This is a phase of grief. And this phase two comes from the multi-dimensional partner trauma model, which is a way to look at the phases of recovery that has been developed by Dr. Barb Steffens and APSATS, the Association for Partner of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists. And I was gripped as I went through this training in 2016 by how there's an entire phase of recovery that is dedicated to the grief process. And this cannot be rushed. If you have had some time where you feel the safety and the stability and you have the truth and your marriage is either healing and being restored, or you have a level of space from the trauma of betrayal as your marriage has ended, you may be surprised at how much the holiday season can evoke memories and intensify the feelings of grief. What I want to tell you is that this doesn't mean that you're regressing in your healing process. I love Dr. Jake Porter's quote. He says, grief is a luxury for the brain that knows that it's safe. So if and when you do hit these moments of grief, this is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you are feeling, and you have to feel in order to heal. In fact, in early phases, many of us are shocked by like how numb we feel and how we're not crying maybe. And this is a phase of the betrayal healing process, is that early shock phase where we are just reacting and trying to figure out and make sense of what has happened. In this grief phase, in this mourning and remembrance second phase of recovery, we're going to experience great grief like waves in an ocean. And if you think about when there's a storm, the waves are huge. And when it's calmer, the waves might be kind of more gentle and subtle. We so much want a sanitized, formulaic, cause and effect, logical process for healing from any trauma. Betrayal is the most disorienting, long-term, non-formulaic, non-linear healing process. Now that is, I'm not saying that to discourage you, but if you find yourself feeling 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, what if what you're dealing with is not actually regression or stepping back, but dipping into the grief that is normal as your whole sense of reality has collapsed and you're trying to reconstruct the narrative of what has really been your marriage and your life? What if that is normal? What if your anger, your intense anger, is not a sign of your unforgiveness, but anger is a phase of grief? What if your anger is a justified reaction to the injustice of being lied to by the person you're most attached to, the person you've trusted the most? And what if your anger is actually a sign that there's something left to deal with, that there are some limits and some no's that you need to state? Or what if it's pointing to a deeper level of grief that you're needing to get to? I want to encourage you to not judge yourself and whether you're doing this right or not, and whether your grief makes sense, whether your anger is justified. This is a very Western lens that we look at really complex human experiences through. And we want it to be neat and tidy, and it just isn't. That is just not the experience of betrayal or any kind of loss. Grief is a messy, messy business. You can find lots of graphics out there to show the grief cycle and process. And these are helpful because they help us identify different parts of grief. But let that graphic never inform you that it's going to be linear or predictable, because it's not. It's a mess. And it's okay if you feel like a mess this holiday season. What I want to encourage you to do is, you may be tempted, if this is your second Christmas, let's say, since betrayal, you may be tempted to like restore all the holiday traditions and do things like you always did before the betrayal ever happened. This long process of healing requires us to slow down, and it requires us to have a backup plan for if and when we are plunged into grief and we know that we need to take better care of ourselves than to just honor and do all the traditions for the sake of the kids or whatever it is. We have our reasons, right? We want it to be all happy and sanitized and okay. Here's something to challenge you with is, was the original first Christmas sanitized and this beautiful nativity scene that we see on people's lawns or in front of churches or on our mantles? Absolutely not. It was a mess. If you've ever given birth to a child, you know birth is a messy, painful, just primal business. So if you're like looking at yourself going, why am I such a mess? Consider that God is with you in the mess, and that mess is normal. It's a normal part of the human experience, especially in the face of betrayal. Jesus is no stranger to messes. His mother Mary, in giving birth to her son in a stable after a long, arduous journey on a donkey and walking like however far that was. Oh my gosh, there was nothing comfortable about that journey. And I know you might look at social media or other people's family Christmas cards coming in the mail and be like, why am I such a mess? There is a degree to which we need to kind of put aside all of the expectations, the pressures, maybe social media altogether in this season, to make space for the reality of the mess that we are facing. I want to encourage you that you are completely normal if you pull out some of your Christmas decorations and the sight and the smell of them just make you want to dissolve into a puddle. The memories that are evoked as we experience the sensory overload of the holidays kind of can hit us over the head and shock us. So if that happens to you, know that that is normal. One of our most powerful senses for evoking strong memories is our sense of smell, the olfactory bulb in the brain that, the scent molecules go into your nose, hit the olfactory bulb, and it bypasses logic and reasoning and some of the other parts of the brain that our other senses filter through. And it goes straight into the amygdala, where our emotional core is. And this can evoke vivid memories and feelings that are completely immersive, almost feeling like we are back in the memory, and it bypasses our logic. And that is your brain's design. So if and when this happens, I want you to know you're not crazy, you're traumatized, you're in phase 2, memory mourning and remembrance, and make space for the remembrance. Some of us are terrified for our kids to see us in tears, but your tears are actually a sign that you need to release some grief. And what if we could tell our kids, depending on their ages, when we pull out these Christmas decorations and we start crying, what if we could tell them, I just need a minute to feel some of my grief. And I'm not sad about you, honey, especially if they're young and they think everything's about them. I'm not sad about you. I love you. But I've had to deal with a lot of losses in the last year. And I'm just processing my feelings. Wouldn't that be actually kind of empowering to our kids to know that emotions are part of the human experience? Doesn't that model to our kids that it's okay for them to have intense feelings and to release them? What if you, when you open a decoration that you hadn't seen in a year, and you're rushed with the smell and the sight and the feel of this piece of your history, and let's say it thrusts you into an anger response. What if instead of judging yourself and asking what's wrong with me, or assuming that it's an unforgiveness problem, what if we looked at our anger differently? What if we consider that anger is a normal part of grief? Jesus was angry. He turned the tables over in the temple because there was an injustice. The temple was being desecrated and used for purposes that God had not intended. Well, your marriage was used for purposes it was not intended when there was a violation of your covenant through his sexual secrets. So what if your anger is a normal response? And what if that is a sign of your grief and of the injustice that you've gone through? What if instead of numbing our feelings with alcohol, food, binge watching, scrolling on social media or news, what if instead we noticed it and we gave ourselves space to feel it? And if it becomes too intense and we're afraid we're going to lose control, what if we had a special place in our home where we could go, maybe even a closet or the car, where we could release some of it physically and emotionally and let the tears fall, let the screaming fly? What if this is all a normal part of the process? You know, our entire worldview shatters after betrayal. There is this thing that happens, all of our memories are kind of filed in our brain like photographs. And if you had any of those old school photo books, or one of those filing boxes, little shoebox to put your photos in order in, what betrayal does is, with all of your holiday memories, which can tend to be really strong with all the intensity of family stuff and traditions, right? And those memories coming back. Betrayal is like taking that box of memories, those photos, and just throwing them all over the ground. And they're completely disorganized, and you have no idea what was true and what wasn't. Like, you could have a memory of, oh yeah, that time that my husband left on Christmas Day and he said he had to go run this errand, like go to the office and pick up something. What if, was he actually meeting as affair partner? What if wait, what about when this happened? This phone call came and he had to leave the Christmas party we were at. Was that actually his mom, or was that his affair partner? There are so many memories that will come to you when you experience the holidays that could feel like it's thrusting you way back into that early phase. But what I want to ask you to consider is, what if that is part of your brain trying to make sense of your history when there have been two different realities: the one you thought was your life and your narrative and your marriage, who you thought your husband was, versus the memories now you have of his disclosing secrets that he had held to you that evoke strong images of threat in your mind. intrusive images that pop up when we least expect it. And what if your brain is going to have to take some time to make sense of your story, to understand you may not understand why ever. Certainly not because of you. It's certainly not a marriage problem. It was the problem within that person with the sexual secrets that they have to explore why they would choose to compromise, why they were numbing and avoiding and distracting their pain with sex. But your brain is going to try to understand why and try to do things like bargaining. Like, for example, if you ever think, well, if only I hadn't gained all that weight, then maybe I could have kept his interest in me sexually, and it must be my fault. Or if only I hadn't stumbled upon that phone number in his phone, which uncovered all the sexual secrets, I would be better off just not even knowing. Those are both examples of how we bargain, which is a part of our grief process. Just notice it. It's normal. Bargaining is very normal. It's our attempt to have avoided the pain that we're in, the grief and the loss. And that bargaining phase can be helpful when our brain can incorporate it to avoid future pain. But in this sense, it can be like a merry-go-round, because you can't avoid the past and what has occurred. This is the reality of what has occurred. And to use the example of maybe if I hadn't gained the weight, he would have found me more attractive. And that is all just based on this idea that somehow you could have prevented his unwanted sexual behavior and that you could prevent it from happening in the future. And the reality is you have no control over what he does or doesn't do, whether he's faithful or not. That's really about him and his work. Now, that's not to say that you're hopeless or helpless, because you can look for signs of his good recovery, but that's not what we're going to talk about in this episode. Just know that his choices are not your fault, and they do not reflect upon your value as a wife, as a woman, as a daughter of God. You may not totally ever know all of the stuff in the basement of his heart that led him to this. I want to tell you that you may be surprised at how grief revisits you during the holidays. And so I invite you to create space for that. Don't pack out your holiday season. Don't say yes to every party. Have a ready excuse or reason why you may or may not be able to follow through on something that you thought you could do. Because grief can surprise us and hit us in the face at moments we least expect it. I encourage you to have I think I already said this on this episode, that you have a space to go to release it when it comes and sneaks up on you. But I also want to encourage you to consider some practices that could help you process the grief bit by bit, which can help your brain deal with those surprising moments where grief hits you upside the head. This is not a formula, okay? Because you can't always control how it hits you. But what if you took 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week, to process your grief intentionally? What if you had a grief work period of time in your day? I have found that the process of regularly facing my grief and feeling it through journaling, and or talking it out with somebody that I trust and I feel safe with, and then doing some kind of physical release of all the pent up emotion and energy in my body. I have found that doing that on a regular basis helps kind of deflate the intensity of my grief over time, because I'm actually metabolizing it. I'm actually processing it instead of avoiding it. There's no way to avoid this. So I'm going to give you guys an exercise that I did early on in my betrayal trauma recovery, and have used many times and have taught it to hundreds, if not thousands of women. These are grief questions. I'm going to put these in the show notes, so you don't have to write it down. You can just look in the show notes. So there's 4 questions. And my encouragement to you would be to just do one question a day. Maybe set a timer for 10 minutes. And the first question is, what do I miss? You'll just free flow journal. Don't filter yourself. Nobody's going to read it, right? This is for you. There's no right and wrong way to feel right now. Whatever you're feeling, it just let it out, right? And when you're letting it out via journaling, you're not harming yourself or anybody else. The problem when we like categorize right and wrong feelings, and especially if you are a committed Christian, you may feel like, for example, anger is wrong. I should not be angry. Well, that's not true. There's anger all over Scripture. Look in the Psalms and see the anger, even with God. It is a normal part of the human experience. The problem is when we think, oh, that's wrong, I'm going to shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. And then all of a sudden it's kind of like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can do that for a little while, right? But if you try to then get 2 beach balls and hold them, one of them's going to pop up and smack you in the face and splash water everywhere. That's the same thing with our emotions. When we give ourselves compassionate space to process the intensity of these feelings associated with grief, it can help us regulate them and then act according to our value system so that we can actually find ways to use our anger to fuel change without letting it control us and harm other people that we don't want to harm, including ourselves. Okay, back to the grief questions. There's 4. You're doing 1 a day. What do I miss? What am I angry about? What am I learning? And what do I need now? So you would just take 1 a day and write for 10 minutes. There is something really healing that can happen to your brain when you write pen to paper. Make sure you have a hiding place for your journal that your kids and your husband can't find, because you want to be able to be fully honest and not have to filter it, afraid that somebody's going to see what you're feeling. If you feel like I need a witness to this anger, you could consider taking your grief journaling to your betrayal trauma trained coach or therapist, or maybe another member of your betrayal healing group, like Women in the Battle, because sometimes our grief needs a witness, right? There's no funeral for our marriage when we're dealing with betrayal, but that doesn't mean you don't need a witness or somebody to grieve with you. Here is the hard thing about grief is it can feel like it's going to suck us under, like drowning in the middle of the ocean. I understand that. So one thing I encourage you to consider doing at the end of your 10 minutes of grief journaling is to make a list of 10 things you're grateful for. And that can feel really rote and trite, but the reality is that whatever you focus on, you get more of. You have to process the grief. But if you transition from your grief work to your regular life via this bridge of gratitude, it can be a really powerful way to shift your focus onto the gifts in your life. Because as brutal and painful as betrayal is, there is also a lot of beauty and wonderful. Sometimes we just have to look for it. In my early betrayal healing process, when my therapist suggested doing a gratitude list, I looked at her like, you've got to be kidding me. I had just lost, oh my gosh, so much. Like my whole reality collapsed. But I did realize, oh, I have food in my fridge, and I have an ability to pay for my electricity. I have provision. And then I could go out in nature and find 1,000 things that were beautiful. Or I could look in the face of my child and see, oh my gosh, he is a gift. So focusing on the things that you're grateful for, maybe even pondering them in your heart, enjoying and noticing is a beautiful way to transition And as is taking a walk or doing some kind of physical activity. If you do the anger writing and you find a whole bunch of anger welling up inside of you, I encourage you to set aside extra time, maybe when you're in a place that nobody can hear you, like in your car, where you could scream at the top of your lungs and release it physically, because it is energy that builds up in your body like pressure and needs to be released. You are worthy of your own time and attention. Doing this kind of deep, hard grief work is exhausting, so make lots of time to recover. Give yourself permission to say no to all the extra pressure that we put on ourselves during the holidays, to focus on what really matters. And you're the only one who knows what really matters to you and to your family. Having an emotionally regulated and healthy mom is more important for your kids than having one with a plastic smile on her face trying to shield them from knowing there's anything wrong at all, which really just flies in the face of what your kids already know in their guts, that mom's not okay. What if instead you could tell your kids, yeah, I am really struggling. I am really grieving, but I have help to help me process and deal with my intense feelings, and I'm not going to burden you with them. But yeah, you're right. Mom's really sad, because that's a normal part of life and it's your truth. It's what you're going through right now. I want you to know that you are not alone on this long, cold, hard journey, kind of like Mary's journey to Bethlehem. I'm here with you. There's so many other women who know what you're feeling and know what you're going through. And I promise, if you take the time and use some of these tools, the grief will lessen over time, not in a linear way, not in a formulaic way, but there can be new meaning and there can be new joy, surprising joy. And some of the most beautiful growth happens because of manure. I mean, that's how the earth works. It's how creation works. It's how God made new growth to happen. It happens after the dead of winter. It happens after we fertilize the ground with manure. I'm not saying that to be trite, because what you're dealing with is awful and it's painful and it matters. And it matters to God. He is near to the brokenhearted and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. He can take even your anger with him. That crisis of faith is a normal part of the grief process and of betrayal healing. I'm with you. You're not alone. And until the next episode, I am holding out hope for you.